I'm telling you, now Chad's doing it to me. They like end with a rock star concert at the end there, so I have to get up and follow that. No, they do a great job. I'm thankful for our praise team. Okay, we are going to continue in our study of the book of Hebrews, and we're in chapter 11, so we're spending a lot of time in the Old Testament, and we'll be in the Old Testament for quite a while because it's discussing the hall of faith, which is patriarchs and matriarchs, people, Bible personalities and characters that had amazing faith and accomplished great things just through faith. So we're going to take a look at a lot of those. So I have to have a pretty brief recap because early service I was talking as fast as a auctioneer and I still didn't get under 45 minutes. So anyway, here's our briefest recap I can give you. Today we are in the book of Hebrews. The Hebrews were being persecuted and pressured by their fellow countrymen, and they were being pressured to observe the law along with faith alone. And so the Hebrews knew that they couldn't do that because Jesus had fulfilled the law. And if they were to do that, they would be living in disobedience and rebellion and compromise. So the author wrote them this letter to help them stay the course or encourage them to stay the course. Now, today we're going to be looking at the faith of Abraham, and we've been here for several weeks looking at Abraham. I'm going to try to finish it up today. I could preach on Abraham for a year straight, but we have to move on with, the book we're in. So we're going to try to close that out today. But last week we looked at verses 8 through 10. Today we're going to look at the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah and the surrounding cities. And our faith or lack thereof is never more evident than when something big like this is happening, when there's a big challenge or difficult times. And today we're going to see the difference in having weak and strong faith in difficult times. And the sad thing is you never really know how strong your faith is until you're tested. So I titled today's message, Faith Under Fire. Now last week we skipped over verses 13 through 16, and I did that because it was more pertinent to today's message than last week's. And that's all you're getting. Okay, so let's jump right in. Hebrews 11, 13 through 16. It says, all these died without receiving the promises, but having seen them and having welcomed them from a distance and having confessed that they were strangers and exiles on the earth. For those who say such things make it clear that they are seeking a country of their own. And indeed, if they had been thinking of that country from which they went out, they would have had opportunity to return. But as it is, they desire a better country, that is, a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. So basically what he was saying there is Noah. We talked about Noah. We've been talking about Abraham. We talked about Sarah. And all of them died in faith without fully realizing all that God had promised them. They didn't get to see the whole culmination of God's plan. But true faith doesn't require 100% proof. It requires 100% confidence in the object of that faith. And the object of their faith was God, and they know that he always kept his promises. So they looked at it as we will play what part we have to play until God accomplishes that ultimate promise. So they faced it with a very faithful attitude. Now, this week we're going to talk about Abraham and his nephew Lot. How many people have heard of him? Lot? Have you heard of him a lot? Sorry. Sorry, dad joke. I couldn't let that go. I know. Anyway, but we're going to talk about Abraham and his nephew Lot. And we're going to take a look at how both of their faiths were tested, and so was their integrity. But Abraham, Lot, and their families and their livestock all traveled together back to Bethel. Now, Abraham was very wealthy. And when I say very wealthy, a lot of theologians and Bible scholars believe that he was the equivalent of a billionaire today. They believe he was that wealthy. And his wealth came in the form of livestock, came in the form of silver, gold. He had a lot of servants. He had a lot of herdsmen. He was very, very wealthy. Now, his nephew Lot was also wealthy, and he also had a lot of livestock and herdsmen and servants. But he wasn't as wealthy as Abraham, but he was still, very comfortable by any standard. Now, because of the size of Abraham and Lot's herds, it became a problem for them traveling together because the land they settled wasn't big enough. I mean, evidently there wasn't enough, water sources and vegetation to sustain both herds. So as a result, their herdsmen and their servants started quarreling and getting into fights and arguments over the space and over the resources. So Abraham could see the handwriting on the wall, and he knew that if he didn't do something, this was going to get ugly, and it was going to get ugly fast, so he had to come up with a solution. So his solution was that he proposed to Lot that they separate their herds and settle in different locations, right? That was his solution. Genesis 13:8. says, so Abraham said to Lot, please let there be no strife between you and me, nor between my herdsmen and your herdsmen, for we are brothers. Is not the whole land before you? Please separate from me. If to the left, then I will go to the right. If to the right, then I will go to the left. Lot lifted up his eyes and saw the valley of Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt, as you go to Zoar. So Lot chose for himself all the valley of Jordan, and Lot journeyed eastward. Thus they separated from each other. Abraham, or Abram here, settled in the land of Canaan, while Lot settled in the cities of the valley and moved his tents as far as Sodom. Anybody heard of Sodom and Gomorrah? Yeah. Okay, so you can see he needs to fire his real estate agent. Okay, 13. Now the men of Sodom were wicked exceedingly and sinners against the Lord. So the reason he came up with this solution, he had to come up with a solution that would keep them close as family, that wouldn't make one or the other feel gypped, but would also give their herds and their families the appropriate space they needed to be successful. So here's the thing is Abraham was so humble that he even let Lot choose which way he wanted to go first. Then after Lot chose, Abraham would choose where he was going to settle. Now Lot chose the valley of Jordan as far as Sodom and Gomorrah. And he did that because there was a lot of lush grazing areas and there was a lot of abundant water supplies and clean water supplies. And Abraham just humbly accepted that choice and settled in Canaan. Now, Abraham didn't put the same amount of time into that decision that Lot did. And a lot of people believe, like I do, that the reason he didn't was he knew God had made promises to him. And God would make his life work wherever he was because of his faithfulness. So he's like, you go ahead and pick, because wherever I pick, I know God is going to take care of us. So Lot chooses probably the worst decision of his life. He chooses Sodom and Gomorrah. And he did that, obviously wanting to have the best land for himself. But you can see that he didn't really think that process through very much. One of the things that worried me about him was he never prayed before he made that decision, right? So anyway, Abraham knew wherever he picked, God would bless him, and that's exactly what happened. If you look at Genesis 13:14, it says, the Lord said to Abram, after Lot had separated from him, now lift up your eyes and look from the place where you are, northward and southward and eastward and westward. For all the land which you see, I will give it to you and to your descendants forever. I will make your descendants as the dust of the earth, so that if anyone can number the dust of the earth, then your descendants can also be numbered. Arise and walk about the land, its length and breadth, for I will give it to you. Then Abraham moved his tent and came and dwelt by the oaks of Mamre, which are in Hebron, and there he built an altar to the Lord. So Abraham knew something about wealth, and you can see that in some of the choices and decisions he made. He knew something about wealth, and it's something that takes us, some of us never learn it, but it takes a lifetime to learn. And what he learned about it was people who are motivated by wealth and by success, according to the world standard, and by worldly approval, will never be content. You will never be content. I've never been around someone who is, you ever met somebody that's just crazy rich? Anybody ever meet somebody like that? You're like, nope. That's how we roll here at Grace. We ain't hanging with nobody got money. No, but if you've ever hung out with them, they never stop. If you were Bill Gates, wouldn't you have stopped a long time ago? His kids can be millionaires for generations and spend ridiculous amounts of money and still be filthy rich. And I don't know, call me lazy, but I'd be like, I'm worth $8 billion. I'm going to call it a day. You know what I mean? But most people will never be fulfilled, never be content. They asked J.D. Rockefeller when he used to be the richest man alive, when will it be enough? He used to smile and look at him and say, when I get a little more. The man was a billionaire in a time when you never even heard of a billion, and he was a billionaire. But they're just never content, and he understood that they're never content. And the reason they're not content is because the world's idea of wealth and success looks different, right? It looks different than we think because it's ever changing. From one generation to the next, what's considered wealthy, what's considered successful changes from generation to generation, right? And that's by the enemy's design because he doesn't want it to be something you can attain. He wants it to be something that will always keep you distracted. In essence, he's trying to get you to consistently hit a moving target. because it always changes what success actually means. That's why the most important thing we can have in this world is a relationship with God, not land and money and all those things. It's a relationship with God. Now, note that Lot reveals something about his character in the choice that he made. And the choices we make do reveal our character, and Lot definitely revealed something about his character when he made this choice, and I'm going to explain that to you. First, Lot revealed that he was full of pride and selfishness. And we see that because he should have insisted that Abraham pick first. It was the custom. It was the law then that you, the oldest, pick first. You respect your elders. They get first choice. And when he said, you pick, he should have said, no, I can't do that. You brought me here. Probably the reason he was wealthy was probably Abraham. The reason he was successful was probably Abraham, right? So what he should have done, had he been a godly man or the kind of man he should have been, was he should have said, no, I'm not going to pick. You pick. You pick, and then I'll take what's left because you're the one that helped me. That's the attitude they were supposed to have. If you look at 1 Peter 5, it talks about this in verse 5. He says, you younger men, talking to guys my age, you younger men, likewise be subject to your elders, and all of you clothe yourself with humility toward one another. For God is opposed to the proud, but gives grace to the humble. But instead, he chose he not only chose first, he chose what he thought was the best land for himself. He was very selfish. He wanted the best for himself. And he did that because he was full of pride. Now, the Bible warns us all over the place about how dangerous pride can be, right? But the world tells us the exact opposite. Have you ever noticed that? How many people, when you were growing up, somebody looked at you and said, have some pride? Anybody ever have that told to you anywhere? You're like, nope, they didn't care. No one cared about me. Okay, but you always hear people say that. They need to have more pride for themselves and things like that. But the Bible tells us in Proverbs 16, 18, and 19, pride goes before destruction. Pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before stumbling. It is better to be humble in spirit with the lowly than to divide the spoil with the proud. Now, and it was Lot's shameful pride that made him not want to submit to his elder, which really influenced his choice here, right? Now, as a coach and as a pastor and as a leader, I found one inescapable fact that's true about just about everyone. And there's one inescapable fact that's always true, and that is that people say they want a leader and people say they want guidance, but most really don't. Most people don't like to be subject to anybody. Most people want to be their own boss no matter what. And I would estimate, this is just my estimation, it could be wrong, but I would estimate around 70% of people just don't want to be led. They just don't want to be led. Anybody here ever been a supervisor or foreman or a business owner? How many people that work for you were like, I cannot wait to do anything you ask me, boss? I mean, it's just not how people roll. They don't want to be led by anyone. And the reason is people are just too prideful to submit to anyone. And often they're too prideful to even submit to God. I've even had people get mad at me because I dared to ask them to answer to someone. I'm establishing all these departments. Years ago, I established all these departments in the church, different areas, and I put people in charge of them. And then there are people down line from them. And sometimes I'd say, well, you're under Scotty's division, so if you have any questions, go to Scotty. And they're like, I get it, it's Scotty, but other than that, no. But, they just looked at me like, you want me to ask him before I do something? I'm like, well, yeah. He runs that department. They're just completely shocked that I would dare to ask anyone to be accountable to anyone. See, people who don't submit to authority usually will never be capable of being a leader, right? Because they say they're humble, and they'll say that they're submissive, and that they crave leadership and they crave direction, but a lot of that's usually just lip service. I believe Abraham found out you can't lead people who think they know everything already. And I think from what I've read on Lot, that's what Lot was at that time. Now, how many people have ever heard of Pastor Adrian Rogers, the late Pastor Adrian Rogers? Raise your hand. You need to look up his ministry, Love Worth Finding. I don't promote a lot of people, but his is very good. And Adrian Rogers, I met him one time when I was at the Billy Graham Training Center for some courses. And the man had a ministry of, brought in over $80 million a year, and this is in the 90s, okay? And he pulls up in an old Taurus. Lived in a small house, And literally, he said his only toy was this old Model T he used to work on. And I'm looking at him like, so your enjoyment is working on stuff? we differ there. But I got to know him, and he gave me advice over the years, and he was just an amazing mentor. I love that man. It killed me when I heard that he went home to be with the Lord. I knew that was a great thing, but I missed him. But he had all these sayings, and one of the sayings he told me that always stuck with me about learning to submit to others, he looked at me and he said, until you can learn to be under, you are never going to be over. And I thought about that, and it was really profound to me because it's true. If you don't know how to serve, how will you ever have others serve you? It was a really brilliant statement that he made there. And Lot was obviously just not a leader because we can see that his leadership failed. You know, and honestly, that's why I think the world's in the shape it's in today. And I know I'm not the only one that when I turn the TV on, have you ever actually thought to yourself, is this a joke? Anybody ever thought that? Thank goodness. I thought it was just me. There's times I turn the news on, I'm like, is this Saturday Night Live? Is this really happening? You know what I mean? Are people really doing these things? Because the world's in terrible shape today because like Lot, most people are too full of pride to be led or be held accountable by anyone. Now, I could preach on that forever. I better move on. Now, second, Lot revealed he had a very weak or no faith. And we know this because he never consulted with God. Like I said earlier, he didn't pray before he chose land. And I'll bet he regretted that choice because had he prayed about it and said, Lord, should I settle in the beautiful land of Sodom and Gomorrah? You know, I can imagine Lord going, well, about that. You know, here in a little while, I'm going to smoke that city. So probably not. I wouldn't settle there. You know what I mean? But he didn't pray about it. He looked and his eyes wandered and he saw how beautiful everything looked and how it seemed to be the best. And he just chose it. He chose it out of selfishness and out of pride. And the land he chose was near some very wealthy cities. But what he didn't consider was those wealthy cities were also very pagan cities. They did not have any regard for God whatsoever. And sadly, he would live to regret that decision because it wouldn't be long till Lot found out, along with the wealth and resources of Sodom and Gomorrah, there were also a ton of wicked and godless people. So Lot also revealed that he had this worldly attitude and he had this worldly perspective. And when we go on in this story, you're going to see what I mean, how he had this worldly perspective. It'll actually kind of shock you. And we know that because of what some believe about the land that he chose. See, some of the Bible historians say that they believe Lot chose Sodom and Gomorrah in those modern cities from that time because he was in love with Egypt. Remember, they first went to Egypt and Abraham got himself in trouble there? Well, he walks into Egypt. It's kind of like somebody from a villa going to Fort Wayne. You're like, shucks, y'all. You know? You go from a small town to a big town, you know, they walk in, and he sees that there's anything you could ever want there. And he fell in love with Egypt. And he had to leave Egypt because of what happened. But I think when he saw Sodom and Gomorrah, he started thinking to himself, another big city, another place that has everything I didn't have growing up, so I think I'll choose this city. So a lot of people believe that he literally chose that because he was still in love with Egypt. And remember, Egypt was full of, just godless, immoral people. Now, in verses 20 through 33, we'll see God acknowledge the wickedness of Sodom and Gomorrah. And not only did he acknowledge they were evil, he also pronounced judgment on them. So let's look at this. Genesis 18, 20 through 22. It says, and the Lord said, the outcry of Sodom and Gomorrah is indeed great, and their sin is excessively grave. I will go down now and see if they have done entirely according to its outcry, which has come to me. And if not, I will know. Then the men turned away from there and went to Sodom while Abraham was still standing before the Lord. See, what happened here was after Lot had left, Abraham was visited in his tent by these men who are actually angels, right? These men who are actually angels, and they came to him to bring messages from God. And it's important to understand who all the participants were in this conversation, because there were angels in human form, in man's form. Now, people ask me all the time, why? Well, if you look in the Bible of every time an angel appeared in its own form, people just freak out. They hit the ground and, it's terrifying to see that. So they would appear in human form so people would be more relaxed and they would listen to them. But we also see as we read on that the Lord was also present in this conversation. The Lord was also present in this conversation. And it's really, really important. And the Lord was probably in human form here. Okay? Because every indication is that he was in human form, standing outside of his tent. And we all know that whenever there's a human manifestation of God, who is it? Sunday school answer. Who is it? Jesus. That's right. It's Jesus. Right? Look at this. Colossians 1:15. It's talking about Jesus. It said, He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For by him all things were created, both in the heavens and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities. All things have been created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. He is also the head of the body, the church, and he is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, so that he himself will come to have first place in everything. For it was the Father's good pleasure for all the fullness to dwell in him, and through him to reconcile all things to himself, having made peace through the blood of his cross. Through him, I say, whether things on earth or things in heaven. See, here's the thing. Jesus would have been the one he was speaking to when they referred to him as Lord. And he basically comes and says, listen, I got to go to this city, Sodom and Gomorrah. I've heard the outcry of the evil that's going on there, and I have got to handle it. I got to see how bad it actually is for myself. Right? So he appears to him like that. But what had probably happened in Sodom and Gomorrah was people hadn't heard anything from God, and they figured that he was okay with everything that was going on because he wasn't saying anything. Have you ever been through that time in your life when God is silent? Raise your hand if you've been through a time in life when God's silent. Sometimes when God is silent in our life, it's not because he's confused. It's not because he's ignorant and doesn't have all the information, right? That's not the case. It's not because he's distracted watching the game, right? And it's not because he approves. Sometimes God waits to give us a chance, right? Especially with believers, he wants us to have a chance to learn from our situation so that we want to call on him. And for unbelievers, he wants to give them time to realize the error of their ways. Right? So the wicked actions and the lifestyles of the people in Sodom and Gomorrah, yeah, they angered God. And people say, why didn't he do anything about it? Until this time. They've probably been doing that for decades or longer. Well, the reason he hadn't done this is God is a merciful God who wants to give everyone a chance to believe. He didn't ever want anybody to be able to say we didn't get a chance. He wanted everyone to have the opportunity to believe. That's why he was patient. That's why he wasn't doing anything up to this point. Right? So I think some of the people in Sodom and Gomorrah felt like his silence meant that he approved, or his silence meant that he didn't exist, one of the two things. But here's the thing we have to remember. God isn't required to nag us into being righteous. He's just not required to do that, okay? Now, humanity has this built-in sense of right and wrong, right? This built-in sense of right and wrong. And if you don't believe that, go into the nursery. Okay, and I'll tell you this because no one has to teach a kid when something's wrong. I mean, you have to teach them more of the detailed stuff later in life, but we automatically know when something isn't the way it's supposed to be. For instance, you see a 2-year-old knock a vase over and break it. They don't know it's valuable. They don't know what value is. They don't know how hard you had to work for it. They just know that it was up there and it shouldn't be down there in pieces, right? So as soon as that happens, they're like, as they walk away, right? And if you ask them, did you do that? What are they going to say? No. I'm like, well, I find that strange since you're the only person in the room. No, it was the Easter Bunny. You know what I mean? You can go into the nursery and see kids stealing toys from each other, right? And if you ask them, did you take that toy? No. I'm like, Easter Bunny? Was that him again? You know? It's just, they know we have this built-in ability to understand right and wrong. God has built that into all of us, and ignoring that natural understanding of right and wrong always has consequences. And the people of Sodom and Gomorrah likely, instead of trying to see what they could do to be in line with the will of God, they probably just created gods that agreed with what they liked to do because they were a pagan society. So either way, God was not ignoring them, and he did realize there was going to be consequences, and he was going to bring it. Because one thing that we have to realize is nothing escapes God's righteous eyes. You're not going to get away with anything. If you've done something, I don't know, how many of you were raised like I was, that thinking that God was waiting behind the door with a billy club, waiting to thump you every time you did something wrong? Anybody raised that way? I literally, when I was 22, I just saw God as this mean guy who was trying to find a reason to throw me in hell. That's what I believed. I was taught my whole life there was a hell, and I was going. Nobody taught me how to get out of it. You know what I mean? But up to that point, I just didn't understand, that God is a loving God. And yes, everything comes before his eyes, but he doesn't give you what you deserve, and you should be thankful for that. that he doesn't give you what you deserve. Okay? Now, if you'll remember, Abraham's nephew and his family, they lived in Sodom and Gomorrah. So when these angels came and said, we're going to destroy it, it made him afraid for them. Genesis 18:23. Abraham came near and said, will you indeed sweep away the righteous with the wicked? Suppose there are 50 righteous within the city. You indeed sweep it away and not spare the place for the sake of the 50 righteous who are in it? Okay, side note here. You have to have a lot of faith to argue with God. So either you have a lot of faith or you're really dumb, right? But just notice what he does here. Verse 25, far be it from you to do such a thing, to slay the righteous with the wicked, so that the righteous and the wicked are treated alike. Far be it from you. Shall not the judge of all the earth deal justly? So the Lord said, if I find in Sodom 50 righteous within the city, then I will spare the whole place on their account. And Abraham replied, now, behold, I have ventured to speak to the Lord, although I am but dust and ashes. Okay, sucking up now. All right. Verse 28, suppose the 50 righteous are lacking 5. Will you destroy the whole city because of 5? And he said, I will not destroy it if I find 45 there. He spoke to him yet again and said, suppose 40 are found there. And he said, I will not do it on the account of 40. Does anybody else think when God's answering us, he's going, I won't, I'll spare it for that too. You know what I mean? He says, yeah, I'll spare it for 40. Verse 30, then he said, oh, may the Lord not be angry, and I shall speak. Suppose 30 are found there. He said, I will not do it if I find 30 there. And he said, now behold, if it were me, I'd be like, come on. But the Lord is patient. And he said, now behold, I have ventured to speak to the Lord. Suppose 25 are found there. He said, or suppose 20 are found there. And he said, I will not destroy it on the account of the 20. Then he said, oh, may the Lord not be angry. And shall I speak only this once? Well, that's a lie. Only this once. Suppose 10 are found there. And he said, I will not destroy it on account of the 10. And I wonder if after he said that, he goes, that's it. Just the 10, right? Yeah. Verse 33, as soon as he had finished speaking to Abraham, the Lord departed, and Abraham returned to his place. So in my opinion, only someone who has great faith in God's fairness and justice would question him. And I believe that God did this knowing Abraham would question him. He knew Abraham's heart, and he wanted Abraham to question him because that would mean that he understood he was completely fair and completely just. So Abraham asked him 6 times if he would spare the righteous who lived there if they found a certain number. He started with 50 and ended with 10, and God agreed to them all, right? Now, after bargaining with Abraham, the angels traveled to Sodom and Gomorrah, but the Lord stayed there with Abraham for just a little while longer. And when the angels arrived in the land of Sodom and Gomorrah, they found Lot living there. So look at this, Genesis 19, 1-3. Now, the 2 angels came to Sodom in the evening as Lot was sitting at the gate of Sodom. When Lot saw them, he rose to meet them and bowed down with his face to the ground. And he said, now behold, my lords, please turn aside into your servant's house and spend the night and wash your feet. Then you may rise early and go on your way. They said, however, no, but we shall spend the night in the square. Yet he urged them strongly. So they turned aside to him and entered his house, and he prepared a feast for them and baked unleavened bread, and they ate. See, here's what was going on there. If you lived on the bad side of Chicago and you had missionaries come and visit and they say, we're going to go sleep in the park. You'd be like, yeah, you don't want to do that, right? Oh, no, we're going to stay there. Oh, no, seriously. You don't want to do that. It's the same thing. He knew how bad the town was, and he knew it would not be safe for them to go stay in the squares. He's like, no, I really think you should stay with me. And they finally agreed and went into his house and ate with Lot and his family. But the evil men of the city knew that Lot had guests, and they planned to assault them, okay? So right before they went to bed, these evil men of the city show up at Lot's door. Look at this, Genesis 19:4. It says, but before they retired for the night, all the men of Sodom, young and old, came from all over the city and surrounded the house. They said to Lot, where are the men who came to spend the night with you? Bring them out to us so that we can have sex with them. Okay, if you have kids here, sorry. Anyway, but these, yeah, you're like, too late now, but these men of the city were so evil that their minds became completely immoral and completely perverted. And their minds were so wicked that they only saw these new people as opportunities to act on their perversion, right? And in this case, an opportunity to act so perverted that it would include sexual assault. Okay? Everybody always talks about all the different parts of this case. Oh, is it about homosexuality? Is it about... Let me tell you, there was a lot of sin in that city, but these were people who were so evil that they wanted to murder and they wanted to rape someone just because they were new to town. This is the mindset of these people. This is how evil it was. But these wicked men had a surprise coming. And that surprise was God's judgment. Okay, God's judgment, because despite all their cultural excuses for sin, that's something that drives me crazy. Okay, I'm just going to spill my guts to you here, right? It drives me crazy when people live a sinful lifestyle and they say, oh, that's my culture. Oh, like God's going to go, oh, it's your culture. Okay, well, that overrides the Bible, you know. But, you know, they were going to answer to God, and their cultural excuses were not going to get them out of trouble. And the approval of the masses was not going to get them out of trouble. Because here's the thing. If all the masses agree with you, that doesn't mean they're right. Okay? There's a big difference. Actually, the Bible tells us that narrow is the road that leads to righteousness, and few there are that find it. And broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many there are that find it. So what does that tell us? If your argument for what you're doing is right, is that most people in the world agree with you, bad argument. Okay? So if they tried that excuse, it wasn't going to work, right? They disregarded God's ways and it had to be dealt with. And eventually everyone, believer or not, will have to, answer to God through his son Jesus. Look at Philippians 2, 9 through 11. It says, for this reason also God highly exalted him, capital H, talking about Jesus, and bestowed on him a name which is above every name, so that at the name of Jesus every knee will bow, of those who are in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and that every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. It cracks me up when I hear people say things like, I will never follow your God. I will never bow a knee to your God. And I'm like, yeah, you will. And they always look at me like, no, I won't. I'm like, yes, you will. You can either do it on this side where it can save you, or you can do it on the other side when you're standing at judgment where it'll be condemnation to you. But one way or another, you will bow before God. It's going to happen. And your believing or not believing it doesn't change it. It's going to happen, right? And that's something that a lot of times I think people forget, is that you will answer to God no matter what. Now, remember earlier we discussed how Lot's actions revealed his character? Well, here again we see how polluted his mind had become from living around these evil people. Now listen to this. Verse 6. He says, so Lot stepped outside to talk to them, shutting the door behind him. Please, my brothers, he begged, don't do such a wicked thing. Look, I have 2 virgin daughters. You guys with me? I have 2 virgin daughters. Let me bring them out to you, and you can do with them as you wish. But please leave these men alone, for they are my guests and under my protection. Okay. When I was reading this, I kept thinking of moms like Crystal and moms like Tina. Pretty much all Mosley moms. But anyway, I was just thinking, I wouldn't go back in that door if I said that and my wife heard it. I'm just telling you, I would rather face the angry, wicked men than what my wife would do to me for making that offer for my daughters. If that were Jake outside the door, he'd be like, okay, and now I'm leaving because she's going to kill me. You know what I mean? I'm just saying. His mind had become so perverted just from living among those people that he offered his daughters to this evil crowd to be sexually assaulted. And he says, do with them as you please. Do with them as you please. And his excuse for doing that was that these visitors were under his protection. So are your daughters, man. You know what I mean? How did he pull that off? But I tell you what, he must have had an understanding wife, or she had her AirPods in, because if she'd have heard that, he was a goner. So here's the thing. Lot fell victim to spiritual erosion of his mind. And that's what happens when you hang around people who don't uplift you. Now, I'm not saying that you should only hang around with Christians. I believe that we should take our light to everybody. We shouldn't be judgmental and think we're better than anybody else. We're not, right? But your closest circles, the people that encourage you, should be people that believe like you. The Bible says iron sharpens iron. But make no mistake, I am not saying not to hang out with people who don't believe. That is your job, is to hang out with people who don't believe. You just can't allow them to be in your circle of influence, right? It's very, very important. But because he was surrounded in evil, he thought giving his daughters to them was a good compromise. His mind, his thinking had been skewed from the people that he lived around all that time. And the same is true today. Have you ever heard the old saying, if you lay down with fleas, what? Or lay down with fleas. If you can find them, lay down with them. No. If you lay down with dogs, you get up with fleas, right? Which is not always true. I lay with my dog every day. Don't have fleas. But I get the general idea, right? And what it's saying is what 1 Corinthians 15:33 is saying, right? It says, do not be deceived. Bad company, what? Corrupts good morals. I think we should tattoo that on the forearm of all of our children at the age of 4. Yeah, it'll hurt, but they'll get over it, right? And then every time they're getting ready to do something, they go, oh, wait. You got to do something, because how many people have ever had your kid hang out with somebody and you know it's not a good influence? Anybody ever have that happen? Is that person here? Point at him. No, I'm just kidding. I'm waiting for everybody to point at me, because I was that guy. But it's very, very true, and you could see how it was affecting him. Now, despite Lot's, misguided attempt to reason with him, the men would not relent, right? They were about to find out that God will not be ignored, and he always protects his people. So they actually started shoving Lot aside. Look at this. Starting in verse 9, it says, stand back, they shouted. This fellow came to town as an outsider, speaking of Lot, and now he's acting like our judge. We'll treat you far worse than those other men. And they lunged toward Lot to break down the door. But the angels reached out and pulled Lot into the house and bolted the door. Then they blinded all the men, young and old, who were at the door of the house, so they gave up trying to get inside. Why did they give up trying to get inside? Because they're blind. Just throwing it out there. Okay, now let's look at the destruction. See, after God struck these evil men, blind, and they gave up, the angels still had a promise to keep. See, the angels that visited promised Abraham that they would deliver his family, and if they found even 10 in the city that were living righteously, they would spare the whole city. They could not find 10 righteous people living in that city. I would love to see them do that search in D.C. I don't know. Even the White House, even the Capitol. Could they find one anywhere down there? I'm just saying, they couldn't find 10 people living righteously, but they still had to keep their promise. So they told Lot, take your family and anyone that's related to you in these cities that will go and leave because the wrath of God is coming. But then they warned him, don't look back. Once you leave here, keep your eyes forward. Don't look back. And a lot of people have asked me why. Well, here's something a lot of people don't realize. We're not supposed to rejoice in people getting what's coming to them, right? Have you ever seen people that say, oh yeah, well that's what he deserved. I want to see it when they go down. That's not pleasing to God. You know what I mean? He's saying, listen, you're being delivered. That's none of your business. Keep walking, right? Eyes forward, keep walking. And this is when we find out Lot's wife's actions also revealed her character. Because evidently her heart still belonged to those evil cities because she couldn't help herself. She turned around and looked, and then God turned her immediately into a pillar of salt. So many jokes, so little time. I'll have to get you another time there. Okay. So Abraham looked from a distance toward those cities, and he saw the smoke and destruction rising up. Genesis 19:27. Abraham got up early that morning and hurried out to a place where he had stood in the Lord's presence. He looked out across the plain toward Sodom and Gomorrah and watched as columns of smoke rose from the cities like smoke from a furnace. But God had listened to Abraham's request and kept Lot safe, removing him from the disaster that engulfed the cities on the plain. You've heard it said that faith can move mountains, right? Abraham's faith was so powerful that it was able to stay the hand of God. Think about that for a minute. Now, I think God set that up to build his faith. But Abraham's faith was so great that God was willing to relent his judgment on behalf of Abraham's love for his fellow man. That's how powerful faith can actually be, and that's why he deserved to be in the Hall of Faith, right? And despite the fact that his own family wasn't faithful, God still listened to the strong faith that he had, and it was that great faith that made it mentioned here. But today's world needs people who have faith like Abraham, because I'll be honest with you, I think it's about as evil as it gets. I do, I'm sorry, and I know that isn't politically correct, but I am not politically correct. But people have forgotten it doesn't matter what the world thinks about you. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if they see you as enlightened. Who cares? It doesn't matter if they see you as tolerant. Who cares? If tolerant and enlightenment means I'm going to agree with sin, no thanks. No thanks. I'm as tolerant as the Word of God will allow me to be. I'm that tolerant. But beyond that, I don't think we should worry about that, because God has set the standard for right and wrong since the day He gave us the breath of life. And just like Sodom and Gomorrah, this world has a surprise coming soon, right? It has a surprise coming. This world may continue to call evil good and good evil, but God doesn't, and we will answer for that. I just don't, even believers today, I don't think they completely grasp how serious this is, because they're becoming more and more like Lot's wife. The believers, we're becoming more and more like Lot's wife. I see believers, pastors, teachers who crave the world's acceptance and approval. Have you guys noticed that? You can see some churches now are more like discos. I mean, they're not churches anymore. It's all about entertainment. And I'm fine with production. I have no problem with that. Jesus could have stopped the storm from the shore. He walked on water. Why? Production. Right? But it can't just be about production. And I feel like we're trying so hard to get the world's attention and approval that we're actually compromising ourselves. They'd rather be seen as tolerant and politically correct than humble and faithful to God. I don't understand that. Some leaders and some pastors, they don't want pupils, they want groupies. They want groupies. They want people who lift them up and worship them. And sadly, it's easy to find people who would rather worship people than they would God. And that's why it drives me crazy. Have you ever met the people who are pastor quoters? Now, you can quote me if you're quoting something I brought you from the Bible, but don't use me as your argument. You'll be talking to someone and they'll go, well, my pastor says, I'm like, hit the brakes right there, son. Did you check it to see if it's true? Because last I checked, your pastor came out of the womb, not out of the shores of heaven, so you need to check that, right? But that's what happens. We're in a world now where pastors, teachers, everyone craves that attention, just like Lot. And I feel like it's really, really going to get us in trouble one of these days. Because soon, just like Sodom and Gomorrah, the only affiliation that matters won't be your political affiliation. It's going to be your affiliation with Jesus, and that's the only thing that's going to matter, okay? And I'll be honest with you, I think it's sad that some people are more proud of their political affiliation than they are of being a believer. That drives me. If some of you were as passionate to post and talk about Jesus as you do about politics, nobody in the Tri-County area would be going to hell. I'm just saying, right? We have got to ask ourselves, when people hear me, do they hear what's important to me? And if what they hear that's important to me isn't God, I'm failing. You see what I mean? I know that quiets everybody down, but it's true. Every time we have an election cycle, people lose their mind. You know what I mean? Every time we have an election cycle. Listen, I've got a news flash for everybody. My political party is Jesus. Amen. And he never gets voted out. He's always going to be on the throne, and there's no one that can change any decisions that he makes because he's God. Okay? And whoever gets elected, I have my preferences, but whoever gets elected, whatever, they can't change God's plan for me. Right? As long as my trust is in God, I don't care who's in the White House. Am I going to do my best to keep the ones out of there I don't like? Yes, I will vote. But you know what? This is not the pulpit for me to become political and talk about politics. You know what this is to talk about? Jesus. You want to talk about my politics? Elect Jesus. There it is, okay? Because someday that's all that's going to matter. And just like Sodom and Gomorrah, when that time comes, there's no changing it when it comes to that time. Now, here's the thing that I think is going to shock a lot of people, right? I don't believe there's a lot of time left. Does that shock everybody? Yeah, now I could be wrong. I'm not that guy that says, I know. I don't know. The Bible says no one knows the time or the hour. It could be 1,000 years from now. It could be tomorrow. I don't know. I'm kind of rooting for tomorrow, but it could be 1,000 years from now, right? But here's what I do know. When he comes, everybody's going to not expect it. They'll be going on with life as they'd always gone on with life. And when he comes, there's no going back and redoing all the things you didn't take the time to do. That's when you'll have to fix it, right? So I don't want to see us become like Sodom and Gomorrah. I want to see us become like Abraham, recognizing the evil in a city and looking for those righteous in it. Looking for people to help escape the evil. That's our jobs. right? That is our jobs. And I think sometimes we forget that. And one last thing, I've left my outline so far, but one last thing, you know what I mean? When the Lord comes back, I'm dying to see how many people will look him in the eyes and think of every opportunity they pass by so they could be accepted by this world. Think about that for a second. How many people will say, well, Lord, give me time to reach my family? That time is over. You know, you had all this time and you never took it. It's so easy to get sucked into the lifestyle of the culture around us, but it's difficult to hold your ground and do what's right. But trust me, the latter of those two is what will get you into heaven. Just throwing it out there, okay? Now, there's a lot more we have to cover on Isaac and Jacob, and we'll pick up that next week. I'm going to go ahead and close there. I'm going to ask if you would to please bow your heads. If this is your first time, we always like to give a brief invitation. If you're not sure where you stand, or you just want prayer, I don't need to know what it's for. Just make eye contact and put your head right back down. Bless those people. Bless those people. And I will be praying. Bless those people. Bless those people. I do pray. When people, listen, this isn't something I just say, I do it. Bless those people. Listen, if you're watching or listening online, God knows your heart. But believers, I feel like I say this all the time, but the one thing that keeps going through my mind when I see the craziness going on around us is, where are God's people? Where are God's people? Because I'm telling you right now, if we were as serious about our faith as we say we are, things wouldn't be where they are right now. We need to start being the Abrahams and less the Lots. Let's pray. God, I thank you so much for all that you do. I thank you for your mercy and your kindness, especially for your grace. God, I don't deserve heaven. I never have and I never will. None of us do. The reason we're going is not because we're good. It's because Jesus is good. And we believe that what he did was enough to guarantee our eternal life. And your word promises if we do that, we can have it. So I just pray that if there's someone here who doesn't know you, whatever's holding them back, just remove it. Because the same way you died on that cross with your arms open is how you still stand today, waiting for anyone who will embrace you. God, we believe the time is short, and we want to see the borders of the kingdom enlarged. Give us as believers the passion to not get distracted with everything that's going on in this crazy world, and stick to what we know, Jesus. Let us share our faith. When people hear us, let them hear you. When they see us, let them see you. We know, God, that we don't want to look back with regret someday. So we just pray that you use us and that we would submit to you. We would pray as we leave here, God, you would keep us safe and let us live what we profess. And if you don't return to take us home before we meet again, we just pray we would come together and give you all the praise, honor, and glory you're so worthy of. And we ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen.